I got a secret. You want to hear a secret? Okay, listen really, really good. Okay, I've got a story to tell you. Don't tell. Yeah, you can tell other people because I'll tell the story to them too. Okay, let's do it. Hello friends, how are you doing today? It's so good to be in this virtual space with you. I am excited to tell you this week's story, and I am so excited to hear another awesome story about the fact that, fill it in if you know the answer, God does not abandon us. That's right, it's another story about how steadfast God is with humanity and how awesome it is to have a God that's so steadfast. This week we're going to hear the story of another prophet, like Samuel from last week. This time the prophet's name is Elijah, and Elijah really had to trust God. And throughout the story we're going to hear about the awesome ways that God showed God's power through Elijah, particularly the story of Elijah and the widow. Now, what's a widow? A widow is a woman who has lost their partner because their partner has died. And this widow was feeling so down and at the end of what she could do, and then she comes across Elijah. So let's hear the story from our story Bible.
Elijah and the widow. Elijah was a prophet. God helped him show and tell others about God. One day, God said, "Pack your things, Elijah. It's time to move to a new town. I have told a widow there to feed you. I will make a miracle." It was not a good time to move. Rain had not fallen for many days. The sun was hot and the earth was dry. Elijah didn't have any friends in the new town, but he listened to God and went to the new town. When Elijah finally got to the town, he was thirsty. Just then he spotted a woman. Could this be the widow God told him about? "Excuse me, ma'am. Could you please bring me a drink of water?" The kind woman hurried to get the water. Grrr! Elijah's tummy growled. He remembered that God said the woman would feed him. He called after her, "Excuse me, ma'am. Could you please bring me a nibble of bread to eat?" The woman stopped in her tracks. She turned to face Elijah. The widow had sad eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't have any bread." She sighed. "The last of my oil and flour will only make a biscuit. My son and I are going to split it as our last meal. We have no other food." She started to cry. "Dry your tears," Elijah said. "God will make a miracle for you. Bake the bread and share it with me. God promises that your flour and oil will not run out." The widow mixed, kneaded, and baked loaf after loaf of bread. Her jar of flour and jug of oil made plenty of food for Elijah, herself, and her son. God's promise was kept. It was a miracle.
That poor widow must have felt terrible about only having this small bit of grain and this small bit of oil left for her and for her child. Can you imagine only having this tiny amount of food and you had to provide your last meal for yourself and somebody you loved? How sad would you be? And then imagine that some random person you've never met comes along and tells you, no, if you give me some of that, give it to me, not yourself and your child who are really hungry, but if you give it to me, God will make sure that you'll never run out of grain and you'll never run out of oil. Do you think you would believe that random person that tells you that? Probably not, and I'm surprised at how faithful and how much God must have been moving in that widow for her to trust when Elijah told her to go and make him a little bit to eat and that they would have enough. That's the God truth in this story. God does not abandon us. God will always make sure that we have enough. Sometimes that can be really hard to understand and to see in the world because we see places like this, or places like this, or maybe even places like this, where it looks like one or a small group of people have tons of stuff, more than they could ever possibly need. But then there are people who don't have any of that. Sometimes those people are living right next door or right in the same city as the people that have all of this money, all of this stuff. Those people with all of that stuff might be the kind of person that if someone said, "Can you just give me a little of what you have and trust that God will provide for you?" they might say, "No, no, 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 this is mine. I've earned it. It's mine. Thank you very much. I will keep it here. It is mine." But that's not what the widow does. The widow trusts in Elijah when he says that if she goes and makes him this little bit to eat, that God will provide. She believes. And she believes that Elijah has this direct connection to God that prophets have. And because of that belief, she is rewarded. They have enough grain. Their grain never runs out. Their oil never runs out. God doesn't abandon them. You see, when it comes to being successful and having enough, God is very different than some people. Do you know how way back in the beginning of our videos I talked about how the Bible had God truths and people truths? And the people truths are not always great, but we learn something about people through them, and then we learn other things about God. Well, a people truth might be that in order to feel like we have enough, we might have to have a lot of stuff all the time, and that's the only way we're gonna feel fulfilled. But what this story tells us is that the God truth is that God will always provide us enough. God doesn't abandon us. God is always filling our grain and replenishing our oil over and over and over again. And sometimes that's really hard to see in the moment. You could feel really sad and really bad, and it can just be impossible to see how God might be working in your life and making things good. But trust that God is always going to replenish your grain and refill your oil. You can hear my dishwasher in the background, but do you see this? This is Buddy's food bowl. Are you gonna give me some food? Because I would quite like some food, please. Well, no, Buddy, it's not quite time for you to have food just yet. But do you believe me that I will give you food for dinner? I mean, yes, I do believe you that you will give me food. Because you always do eventually. That's right, Buddy. I always give you food eventually. Well, yeah, but you know, right now I'm really hungry. I would really quite like some food. Buddy, I just gave you your breakfast. It's been like 2 hours. Yeah, okay. That's true. You see, as far as Buddy's concerned, that food bowl, that's empty right now. But what Elijah taught through this miracle of all of this food was that God has a massive thing full of food that God will always provide for us. Even when we're feeling really hungry. Oh, Buddy, so hungry. Are you still talking about food? I would quite like some food. Oh, Buddy. Just ignore this massive garden hose in my kitchen. It was frozen full of water, and I am defrosting it. Moving on. So just like Buddy trusts that every day, twice a day, I will refill his food bowl, Elijah was showing that no matter what, God is always there to provide for us. We don't even have to think about it. Buddy doesn't have to wonder if I'm going to give him his food. It's gonna happen. And we don't have to worry about God ever abandoning us or forgetting about us. It's never gonna happen. God always is doing it all the time. And isn't that awesome? So when you think about what it means to have enough, I don't want you to think about this or this, definitely not this. What I want you to think about is, do you have enough of this? Do you have enough of this? And think how much of this you have. That's where God is. God isn't in all the fancy stuff and the expensive house and the nice car. God is in you. God is in me. Ah, God is so great, and God never abandons us. We will always have enough with God. Okay, friends, I hope you have an awesome week. I will see you next week. This week, I want you to think about all of the little ways that God is providing things for you. All of the little ways. Not with the money or the candy or the stuff, but all of those little things that we can't touch. There are more than you can imagine, trust me. All right, friends, I'll see you next week. Bye!